I'd like to invite our first pitcher up here, Jackie from Combat Veteran Players.
All right, well, hello everybody. As Dave has just said, I'll be talking to you about the Combat Veteran Players here tonight. The CVP is our acronym. The CVP began in London about 6 years ago, and that followed a brief period where I had been out there training for a master's degree in directing. I was a West End director for a little bit, in and out of the city from that point on, realizing I loved what I did, but I wanted to make more of an impact than just making money for producers throughout the city. Through one introduction to another, I was introduced to an organization called Combat Stress. Combat Stress is the leading UK charity for mental health struggles that we have amongst ex-servicemen throughout the UK. Through some ethnographic research that took place for about a year, I began to be introduced to ex-service members who were struggling in a variety of ways. So it's not just PTS that we work with. PTS is definitely quite prevalent, but a lot of TBI, a lot of predisposed conditions. So you're working with things like personality and anxiety disorders, a lot of substance abuse, a lot of social isolation, working with guys who have been homeless for quite some time, unemployment, poverty, a whole lot of difficult things that have happened in the past. It took some time to start to get these guys into a room because what I was talking about was doing Shakespeare, which was my love from years past to direct. And you can talk about theater with ex-service members, and that's a first strike against you. Then you start talking about Shakespeare. They start to run a little further from you. Then the first production I did was A Midsummer Night's Dream, so I was talking about potions and fairies and all sorts of things that had every strike against me I could possibly have. But after enough time and a lot of lonely nights of me in a rehearsal room waiting for people to come in, the right group members started to show up. My idea was that I would take 3 months of a break from the commercial world. I would do 3 months of an on-book read of A Midsummer Night's Dream. We would look at some of the physical manifestation of breath control when you're working with Shakespeare, and then I would send them on their way and I would get back to my West End life. That didn't happen. These guys came in and they changed my world. So they were the ones that began to say, well, why can't we perform it? Why do we have to be on book? Why can't we perform in actual theater? Why can't you train us? Why can't you direct us? So I did, and I realized I'd been selling them short before. I'd been thinking they couldn't do it. I was thinking, well, with short-term memory loss, there's no way they can remember Shakespeare. And 6 years later, I look back, and I couldn't have been more wrong. So it took about a year of rehearsals, that first production, and those guys went on. They performed A Midsummer Night's Dream at a theater in town. I called in a favor. That night, the Royal Shakespeare Company signed on with us. So they began to step in, do some work with the guys for our second performance, which was Henry V. Again, I realized I wasn't going back to the commercial world. I was staying with these guys. The company began to grow. Henry V brought some, let's say, trickier moments because you're working with things that are a little bit closer to heart than you are with A Midsummer Night's Dream. And a lot of what we do in a CVP model is we touch into some of those emotions that can be quite tricky, particularly when individuals have worked with trauma and they've worked with other various social and personal difficulties. But we touch into them through a mask. So there's not personal narrative happening on the stage. What's happening is you're exploring these emotions through Elizabethan verse and Elizabethan characters. And you're doing that while you're also increasing literacy levels. So the average literacy level of UK infantry was age 11. That's not what they are anymore. These guys have skyrocketed over the years. So through all of that, we moved on with Henry V, began to see these skills develop even further, and then I felt I needed another challenge, so I thought, let's do Hamlet. So we went from comedy to history to tragedy. We spanned the canon. Hamlet went on at Shakespeare's Globe Theatre. That was the main stage performance. That was 2014. Those guys are still going in London, but I'm coming back home now, here to DC. I was talking to some individuals earlier. My trip to London was supposed to be 3 months, and I forgot to come back. It's 8 years later, and I'm finally coming home. And what we're doing now is expanding the branch. So we're reaching out here to the US now to do the same thing that we've seen happen there. Here I'm working at Walter Reed, as well as Fort Belvoir. We're working with individuals that are coming to us much more recently, having transitioned out of the military, than what we've worked with in the UK. So it's a very different demographic already. And we've started them here on the Comedy of Errors. They're doing brilliantly, absolutely brilliantly. The plan is to perform at the Shakespeare Theater in DC in just a couple of months, so I'm working them through rehearsals right now. And I'm hoping and expecting to see very similar outcomes to what we've had in the UK. So again, those increased literacy levels, we've had returns to employment, We've had social skills return. These guys, many of whom have hidden from the military for years, they're now back into a social bond that they've been missing all this time. We've had relationships reattach themselves that were once quite estranged. I had one who reconnected with his son for the first time in 18 years. And he did that at the Henry V debut. And I was crying. I'm not even going to pretend like I wasn't. It was a pretty amazing moment. We've had healthy romantic relationships entered into. We're seeing these guys now creating lives for themselves that they once believed they couldn't have again. Confidence is skyrocketing, self-worth, self-achievement. It's making all the difference in the world. So what I'm looking to do is just to see those same results here, to see the same energy, and to see the same passion for Shakespeare infuse itself among the members that we're working with in the U.S. Thank you.